The dirt beneath Catherine's fingernails had been cold that morning in Philadelphia when she buried Thomas. And now, 6 weeks later in the summer heat of 1876, it still felt like she could scrape away the memory if she just dug deep enough into her own palms. The stagecoach lurched over another rut in the dusty trail, and Catherine gripped the wooden seat beneath her, watching the endless expanse of Wyoming territory unfold through the window. She had left behind the narrow brownstone on Chestnut Street, the pitying glances of neighbors who whispered about the young widow, the suffocating weight of a life that had ended before it truly began. Thomas had been a good man, respectable and kind, but their marriage had been arranged by families more interested in merging shipping businesses than in creating happiness. When the fever took him at 28, Catherine had felt grief, yes, but also something she was ashamed to acknowledge even to herself: relief. She was 23 years old, and for the first time in her life, she belonged to no one. The stage driver had told her that morning they would reach Red Creek by afternoon, a small town that had sprung up along the cattle trails, where her late aunt's boarding house now sat empty, waiting for someone to claim it. Catherine had a lawyer's letter in her traveling bag and $53 sewn into the lining of her skirt. She had no idea how to run a boarding house, but she knew how to keep accounts and manage a household, skills her mother had drilled into her since childhood. It would have to be enough. The other passengers, a whiskey salesman and an older woman traveling to meet her son, had stopped trying to make conversation with Catherine somewhere around the Nebraska border. She preferred it that way. The black morning dress she wore was armor against unwanted questions, though the fabric was far too heavy for this climate. Sweat traced lines down her spine, and her corset felt like an instrument of torture, but propriety demanded she maintain appearances for at least a year. She had already scandalized Philadelphia society by leaving so soon after the funeral. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Red Creek, Catherine's first thought was that the town looked exactly like every other settlement they had passed through. A main street of packed dirt, wooden buildings with false fronts trying to appear more substantial than they were, and dust covering everything like a second skin. But there was something raw and honest about it too, a place still deciding what it wanted to become. The driver helped her down, and Catherine stood on the street with her two trunks, trying to get her bearings. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she raised a hand to shade her eyes, searching for anything that might be the boarding house. "You look lost, madam." The voice came from her left, and Catherine turned to find a man watching her from the shade of the general store's awning. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore the practical clothes of someone who worked outdoors: denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, worn boots, and a hat pushed back on his head. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray, blue, and direct, with a hint of amusement that made her spine stiffen. "I am looking for a boarding house," Catherine said, keeping her voice cool and proper. "It belonged to Margaret Winters." "Ah, you must be the niece from back east." He stepped out of the shade, moving with an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. "Maggie talked about you sometimes. I'm sorry for your loss. She was a good woman." Catherine nodded, unsure how to respond. She had met her Aunt Margaret only twice, both times when she was a child. The woman had been her father's sister, a spinster who had shocked the family by moving west 30 years ago. They had exchanged letters occasionally, stiff, formal things that revealed little. Catherine had not even known about the boarding house until the lawyer's letter arrived. "The house is just up the street," the man continued, pointing. "The two-story building with the green shutters. Been sitting empty since Maggie passed in April." "Thank you," Catherine said. She waited for him to leave, but he made no move to go. Instead, he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You planning to run the place yourself?" he asked. "I fail to see how that is your concern, Mr. Walker. James Walker, but most folks call me Walker." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and considerably more dangerous to her peace of mind. "And you're right, it is not my concern. But Red Creek is a small town, Mrs. Winters, and folks tend to look out for each other. A woman alone, running a boarding house, well, you might find yourself needing help from time to time." "It is Mrs. Morrison," Catherine corrected automatically. "And I assure you I am quite capable of managing my own affairs." "Never doubted it," Walker said, but his eyes said otherwise, taking in her expensive morning dress, her soft hands, her Eastern accent. She could read his assessment as clearly as if he had spoken it aloud. City woman, probably never done a day of real work in her life, would not last a month. The assumption stung, partly because there was truth in it. But Catherine had not traveled 2,000 miles to prove herself to some cowboy who thought he could read her like a dime novel. "If you will excuse me," she said, gathering her skirts. "Your trunks," Walker said, gesturing to the luggage still sitting in the dust. "You cannot carry those yourself." Before she could protest, he had hefted both trunks as if they weighed nothing and started walking up the street. Catherine had no choice but to follow, irritation warring with gratitude. She had needed help, much as she hated to admit it. The boarding house was larger than she had expected, a proper 2-story structure with a covered porch and those green shutters that needed painting. Walker set her trunks down by the front door and pulled a key from his pocket. "The lawyer gave this to me," he explained at her questioning look. "Asked me to check on the place now and then, make sure nobody broke in. I run cattle on the land north of town, so I am in Red Creek regular enough." Catherine took the key, their fingers brushing briefly. She unlocked the door, and it swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty rooms beyond. The air inside was stale and hot, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the windows. Walker carried her trunks inside, setting them in what appeared to be a front parlor. Catherine looked around, taking in the worn furniture covered with sheets, the faded wallpaper, the staircase leading to the second floor. It was all so foreign from the polished elegance of her Philadelphia home, yet something in her chest loosened at the sight. This was hers, truly hers. "The pump in back still works," Walker was saying. "I checked it last week. There is firewood in the shed, though you will not need much this time of year except for cooking." Maggie had 6 rooms she rented upstairs, and she lived in the back 2 rooms down here. "Kitchen is through that door." He gave her the full tour without asking if she wanted it, pointing out which floorboards were loose, where the roof had leaked last spring, which window stuck. Catherine followed, part of her resenting his presumption and part of her desperately grateful for the information. When they returned to the parlor, she found herself at a loss for words. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," she finally said. "I appreciate your assistance." "Walker is fine," he said. "And you are welcome, Mrs. Morrison. If you need anything, I am staying at the hotel for the next few days. After that, my ranch is about 10 miles north. The Circle W, anyone in town can give you directions." He touched the brim of his hat and headed for the door. Catherine watched him go, then called out before she could stop herself. "Walker," he turned, one eyebrow raised. "Why did my aunt talk about me? We barely knew each other." Something shifted in his expression, a softness that surprised her. "She got a letter from you, must have been 3 or 4 years back. You wrote about wanting to travel, to see something beyond the life that had been planned for you. Maggie said you reminded her of herself at that age." Catherine remembered that letter, written late at night when she was 19 and newly engaged to Thomas, feeling like the walls of her future were closing in. She had poured out her heart to a woman she barely knew, then felt foolish and never mentioned it again. She understood, Walker added quietly. Why you came here, I mean. Fresh starts, they are what the West does best. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Catherine was alone in the dusty silence of her new life. She spent the rest of that day and all of the next cleaning, a task made harder by her corset and heavy skirts, but satisfying in a way that directing servants had never been. She stripped the sheets from the furniture, swept floors, wiped down surfaces, aired out the rooms upstairs. The physical labor made her body ache, but it also quieted the restless thoughts that had plagued her since Thomas's death. On the third morning, Catherine walked to the general store to buy supplies. The proprietor, a round-faced man named Mr. Hutchins, greeted her with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. Mrs. Morrison, glad to see you settling in. Your aunt was one of our best customers, always buying in bulk for her boarders. You planning to reopen the house? I am considering it, Catherine said carefully. She had been thinking about little else. The money from her aunt's small estate would not last forever, and she needed an income. But the prospect of running a boarding house, of cooking and cleaning for strangers, was daunting. Well, if you do, you will have customers right away, Mr. Hutchins said, measuring out the flour she had requested. We have been sending folks over to Larson's hotel, but he only has 4 rooms and they are always full. Drovers coming through, businessmen, sometimes families passing through on their way to California or Oregon. Maggie ran a respectable place, clean and affordable. Folks trusted her. Catherine paid for her purchases, mulling over his words as she walked back to the boarding house. She was arranging canned goods in the kitchen when someone knocked on the front door. Walker stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Mrs. Morrison, he said. I hope I am not disturbing you, but I wanted to ask something. Catherine waited, one hand on the doorframe. I have 3 ranch hands coming in next week to help with a cattle drive, Walker said. They will be in town for about a month and Larson's hotel is full up. I know you have not officially reopened, but I was wondering if you might consider renting them rooms. I would pay in advance and I can vouch for their character. They are good men, hardworking and respectful. It was exactly the opportunity Mr. Hutchins had mentioned, but Catherine hesitated. Taking in boarders would mean committing to this life, to running the house, to staying in Red Creek. It would mean accepting that her old life was truly over. Walker must have read her uncertainty because he added, You do not have to decide right now. Think about it. But Mrs. Morrison, if you are going to make a go of this place, you will need to start sometime. Might as well be when you have someone vouching for the tenants. Why are you helping me? Catherine asked, the question emerging before she could filter it. You do not know me. Walker was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Your aunt was kind to me when I first came to Red Creek, 7 years ago. I was 21 and had nothing but a horse and big dreams. She gave me a room for a month, did not ask for payment until I had work. Said she believed in giving folks a chance to prove themselves. I figure I owe her memory at least that much. The sincerity in his voice made Catherine's throat tight. She nodded. I will have the rooms ready, she said. Tell your men they can move in next week. The smile Walker gave her was bright enough to rival the Wyoming sun. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. You will not regret this. But as Catherine watched him walk away, she wondered if regret was even possible anymore. She had already made so many choices that could not be unmade. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine cleaned the upstairs rooms, aired out mattresses, washed linens that had been stored away. She went through her aunt's recipes, simple hearty fare designed to feed working men. She had never cooked a full meal in her life, had never done more than supervise kitchen staff, but she learned quickly through trial and error. Her first attempt at biscuits came out hard as rocks. Her second batch was better. By the third try, they were actually edible. She also visited the general store, the bank, and the church, introducing herself to the townspeople. Red Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and news of the Eastern widow had spread quickly. Most people were welcoming, curious about her plans for the boarding house. A few were skeptical, their doubt written plainly on their faces. Catherine held her head high and refused to let their opinions matter. On the day Walker's ranch hands were due to arrive, Catherine woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in a simpler black dress, one designed for work rather than show, and pinned her dark hair into a neat bun. She made coffee, started breakfast, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. Walker arrived mid-morning with 3 men who looked exactly like what she had expected from ranch hands. Weathered, dusty, and trail-worn. He introduced them as Pete, a grizzled man in his 50s with a white mustache, Henry, who could not have been more than 20 with a shy smile, and Jack, somewhere in his 30s with a scar across his left cheek. "Gentlemen," Walker said, his voice taking on an authoritative tone Catherine had not heard before. "This is Mrs. Morrison. She is doing us a favor by taking you in, so I expect you to be on your best behavior. That means no drinking in the rooms, no profanity in the house, and you treat the lady with respect at all times." "Understood," the 3 men nodded, murmuring their agreement. Catherine showed them to their rooms, explained the house rules: meals at set times, no muddy boots past the front hall, rent due on Fridays, and left them to settle in. Walker lingered after the others had gone upstairs. "If they give you any trouble, any at all, you let me know," he said. "I am sure we will manage just fine," Catherine replied, though she appreciated the concern. "I know you will," Walker said, and the confidence in his voice steadied something inside her. "You are stronger than you think, Mrs. Morrison." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her to wonder how he could possibly know anything about her strength when she was still figuring it out herself. Having boarders changed everything. Catherine rose at 5 each morning to start breakfast, served meals 3 times a day, cleaned, did laundry, and fell into bed exhausted each night. It was harder work than anything she had done in Philadelphia, and she loved it in a way that surprised her. There was satisfaction in seeing the men enjoy her cooking, in maintaining a clean and orderly house, in earning money through her own labor. Pete, Henry, and Jack were model tenants, respectful and quiet. They worked long days with Walker, coming home tired and grateful for a hot meal. Henry was particularly kind, always offering to help carry water or chop wood. Catherine learned that he was an orphan from Kansas, working to save money for his own homestead someday. Walker came by most evenings to discuss the next day's work with his men. He always asked Catherine how she was managing, if she needed anything, his concern genuine and unself-conscious. She found herself looking forward to those brief conversations, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the easy competence he radiated. One evening, about 2 weeks after the men had moved in, Walker stayed after the others had gone upstairs. Catherine was cleaning up the kitchen, and he appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "Need any help?" he asked. "I can manage," Catherine said automatically, then caught herself. "But I would not refuse the company." Walker grinned and picked up a dish towel. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Catherine washing while Walker dried. "You have taken to this life quickly," Walker observed. "Most Eastern ladies would have given up by now." "Most Eastern ladies have somewhere else to go," Catherine said. "I do not. This is my life now, so I might as well make the best of it. Is that really how you see it? Making the best of a bad situation? Catherine paused, hands deep in soapy water, considering. No, she said slowly. That is not fair. The truth is, I am happier here than I ever was in Philadelphia. I know I am supposed to be in mourning, to be devastated by my loss, but Thomas and I barely knew each other. Our marriage was an arrangement, nothing more. She had not meant to say so much, to reveal so much, but something about Walker's quiet presence invited honesty. Maggie told me about your letters, Walker said. About how you felt trapped. I understand that feeling. I grew up in Missouri, son of a banker who expected me to follow in his footsteps. But I wanted something different, something I could not even name at first. So I left, came out here, and found it. What did you find? Catherine asked, turning to look at him. Freedom, Walker said simply. The chance to build something that was mine, to succeed or fail on my own merits. It is hard work, and some days I wonder if I made the right choice. But then I look at my land, my cattle, the life I have built, and I know I could never go back. Do you ever get lonely? The question slipped out before Catherine could stop it. Too personal, too revealing. Walker's eyes met hers and something passed between them, an understanding that made her heart beat faster. Sometimes, he admitted, but lonely is better than living a lie. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Walker cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell. It is getting late, he said. I should go. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him leave, her hand still in the cooling dishwater, and wondered what was happening to her. Thomas had been dead less than 3 months. She should not be having these feelings, these thoughts about another man. It was improper, unseemly, wrong. But it also felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. The cattle drive Walker had been preparing for began the following week. He and his men would be gone for nearly 10 days, driving a herd to the railhead in Cheyenne. The boarding house felt empty without them, though Catherine kept busy with maintenance and improvements. She used some of the rent money to buy paint for the shutters, fabric to make new curtains, and supplies to fix the leak in the roof. Mr. Hutchins mentioned that a school teacher was coming to Red Creek in August and would need a place to stay. Catherine met with the town council and secured the contract to board the teacher for the academic year. She also took in 2 traveling salesmen for a week and a family passing through to Oregon for 3 days. The boarding house was becoming a real business, and Catherine was becoming a real businesswoman. Walker returned from Cheyenne on a Thursday afternoon, dusty and tired but wearing a satisfied expression. He found Catherine in the garden behind the house, where she was attempting to revive the vegetable patch her aunt had once maintained. "Mrs. Morrison," he called out. "Got a minute?" Catherine stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. She had abandoned her heavy mourning dresses for simpler black cotton, and she had stopped wearing her corset except on Sundays for church. The freedom was intoxicating. "How was the drive?" she asked. "Successful. Sold the herd for a good price, better than I hoped." Walker pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is the rent for next month, plus a little extra. Pete, Henry, and Jack will be staying on through the fall if you will have them." "Of course," Catherine said, taking the envelope. "They are excellent tenants. And you are an excellent landlady." Walker's expression turned serious. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to talk to you about something. There is a town dance next Saturday night, a social at the church hall. I was wondering if you might consider attending." Catherine's heart stuttered. "I am in mourning," she said automatically. "I know. And I am not asking you to dance or to make a spectacle, but you have been in Red Creek for over a month and you have barely had a moment to yourself. It might be good for you to get out, to meet more people. Folks are curious about you, and it would help your business to become part of the community. It was a practical argument, and Catherine knew he was right, but there was something in his eyes that suggested his reasons were not entirely practical. "I will think about it," she said. "That is all I ask," Walker replied. But Catherine had already made up her mind. She would go. The night of the dance, Catherine dressed carefully in her best black dress, the one with the modest neckline and tight sleeves. She arranged her hair in a softer style, allowing a few curls to escape around her face. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman who was both familiar and strange. Still Catherine Morrison, but different somehow, changed by sun and work in this wild place. Walker arrived to escort her, and the look on his face when he saw her made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Catherine murmured, taking the arm he offered. The church hall was crowded with what seemed like half the town. Catherine recognized many faces from the general store and Sunday services, but there were also ranch families from the surrounding area she had not met. Walker stayed close to her side, making introductions, his hand at the small of her back a steady, warm presence. The music started, a fiddle and guitar playing a lively tune. Couples filled the dance floor, and Catherine watched with a mixture of longing and restraint. She had always loved dancing, but it would be inappropriate for a widow in mourning. "Walk with me," Walker asked, gesturing toward the door. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, more than Catherine had ever seen in Philadelphia. Walker led her to a bench near the church, and they sat, the sounds of music and laughter drifting through the open windows. "Thank you for coming tonight," Walker said. "I know it was not easy." "It was the right thing to do," Catherine said. "You were right about needing to be part of the community. That is not the only reason I wanted you here." Walker turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Mrs. Morrison, Catherine, I need to be honest with you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, I have developed feelings that I probably should not have. You are in mourning, you are trying to build a new life, and the last thing you need is some cowboy complicating things. But I cannot keep pretending that I see you only as a friend or a business associate." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I care about you," Walker said quietly. "More than I should, maybe more than is wise. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if you need me to keep my distance, I will respect that. But I had to tell you the truth." For a long moment, Catherine could not speak. She thought of Thomas, of duty and propriety, of what people would say. Then she thought of those letters she had written to her aunt, of the girl who had dreamed of something more than an arranged marriage and a circumscribed life. "I care about you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Walker reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I do not know if what I feel is real or if I am just clinging to the first person who has shown me kindness. Because it has only been 3 months since my husband died and I should be devastated, but instead, I feel alive for the first time in years. Because I am afraid of making another mistake, of rushing into something I do not understand." "Then do not rush," Walker said. "We have time, Catherine. I am not going anywhere. We can take this as slow as you need." "What exactly is this?" Catherine asked. Walker smiled, squeezing her hand. "How about we start with friendship? Real friendship, the kind where we are honest with each other about what we are feeling, and we see where it goes from there." It was such a simple offer, but it felt like a lifeline. Catherine squeezed his hand back. "I would like that." They sat together in the starlight, hands clasped, listening to the music drift from the hall. And for the first time since Thomas's death, Catherine felt something that might have been hope. The summer days blurred into weeks, and Catherine's life in Red Creek settled into a rhythm that felt like it had always been hers. The boarding house was nearly always full now. The schoolteacher, a practical young woman named Miss Sarah Wells, had moved in mid-August. 2 permanent boarders, clerks from the bank, took rooms on the second floor. Pete, Henry, and Jack remained, their presence now as familiar as the furniture. And then there was Walker. He came by nearly every day, sometimes on business, sometimes just to visit. They took walks together in the evenings when Catherine's work was done, exploring the area around Red Creek. He showed her the land where his ranch sat, 10 miles of rolling grassland with a creek running through it. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's strict rules and her father's disappointment that she had not been born a son. They talked about everything and nothing, slowly weaving their lives together in conversation. Walker told her about learning to rope cattle, about the harsh winter of '73 that had nearly broken him, about his dreams of expanding his herd. Catherine shared her love of reading, her secret talent for drawing, her growing confidence in her ability to manage the boarding house. Sometimes Walker would bring her small gifts: wildflowers picked on his rides, a ribbon from the general store that matched her eyes, a book of poetry he thought she might like. Catherine treasured each offering, pressing the flowers between the pages of her Bible, wearing the ribbon in her hair, reading the poems late into the night. But they maintained a careful propriety. Walker never came to the house without a legitimate reason. They were never alone together for long. When they walked, they stayed in view of town. It was a courtship conducted in the spaces between respectability and desire, and it was both frustrating and sweet. In September, Catherine's mourning period officially ended at 6 months. She continued to wear black, not out of grief for Thomas, but because it was practical and expected. But she also allowed herself small freedoms: a colored shawl, a ribbon, a smile that came more easily. One Sunday after church, Walker asked if she would like to see his ranch properly, to have dinner there with him and a few of his friends. It was a bold invitation, one that would set tongues wagging, but Catherine found she did not care. She was tired of living by other people's rules. "I would like that very much," she said. The following Saturday, Walker picked her up in a wagon, and they made the 10-mile journey to the Circle W. Catherine had expected something rough and temporary, but Walker's ranch was well established. The house was a solid structure of wood and stone, smaller than her boarding house but well built. There were corrals for the horses, a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. "You built all this?" Catherine asked, impressed. "With help," Walker said. "But yes, over the past 7 years. It is not much yet, but it is mine." Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room had a stone fireplace, simple furniture, shelves lined with books. The kitchen was small but functional. There were 2 bedrooms and a loft above. "It is wonderful," Catherine said honestly. "You should be proud." Walker's friends arrived in the afternoon. A couple named Tom and Ruth Harrison, who owned the neighboring ranch, and a man named Charlie who worked as a horsebreaker. Ruth was a practical woman in her 40s who had been in Wyoming since before the war. She and Catherine took to each other immediately, trading stories about the challenges of frontier life while they prepared dinner together. Over a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from Ruth's garden, the conversation flowed easily. Tom told stories about the early days of Red Creek, when it had been nothing but a few tents and big dreams. Charlie entertained them with tales of particularly stubborn horses. Walker watched Catherine with an expression that made her feel warm and seen. After dinner, Ruth pulled Catherine aside while the men were outside looking at a new colt. "He is in love with you," Ruth said bluntly. I have known Walker since he came to this territory, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Catherine felt her cheeks heat. We are just friends. Honey, I have been married for 23 years. I know the difference between friendship and love. Ruth's expression softened. I also know you are a widow, and that complicates things. But life out here is too hard and too short to waste on propriety. If you care about him, do not let fear hold you back. What if I am not who he thinks I am? Catherine asked quietly. What if I cannot be what he needs? What if you are exactly what he needs? Ruth countered. What if you stop worrying about being perfect and just allow yourself to be happy? The words stayed with Catherine on the ride back to Red Creek. Walker was quiet, comfortable with the silence between them. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. Thank you for today, Catherine said. I had a wonderful time. So did I. Walker's hands were still at her waist, his face close to hers in the gathering dusk. Catherine, I know we said we would take things slow, but I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I have already fallen. And I do not want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable, but I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is anything less than that. Catherine's breath caught. She could feel the warmth of his body, see the vulnerability in his eyes. This man who was strong and capable and self-sufficient was standing before her, offering his heart. I am scared, she whispered. I know, Walker said. So am I. Loving someone is terrifying, but Catherine, you are worth the risk. We are worth the risk. She did not make a conscious decision. Her body moved before her mind could interfere, rising on her toes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. Walker's hands tightened on her waist, and he answered with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they broke apart, Catherine was trembling. I love you too, she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. I do not know when it happened, but I do. I love you, Walker. The smile that spread across his face was bright enough to rival the sun. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Catherine felt the last walls around her heart crumble. They stood together on her porch until the stars came out, talking in soft voices about the future. Walker wanted to marry her, he said, but he would wait as long as she needed. Catherine admitted that the thought of marriage still frightened her, that she needed time to become someone in her own right before she became someone's wife again. Then we wait, Walker said simply. I am not going anywhere. The autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. Catherine and Walker made no secret of their courtship now, walking together openly, sitting beside each other in church, attending town functions as a couple. There was gossip, of course, whispers about the widow who had moved on too quickly, but Catherine found she could bear it. She had Walker's love and her own growing confidence, and that was enough. The boarding house continued to thrive. Catherine hired a young woman named Lily to help with the cooking and cleaning, freeing her up to focus on the business side of things. She started offering packed lunches for travelers, advertising her clean rooms and good food. By October, she had to turn away potential boarders because she was full. She also started drawing again, something she had not done since before her marriage. Walker had noticed her sketches and encouraged her, bringing her good paper and pencils from Cheyenne. Catherine drew the landscape around Red Creek, the boarding house, the people she met. Walker hung her drawing of his ranch house over his fireplace, declaring it the finest piece of art in Wyoming territory. In November, a harsh early winter storm swept through the area. Catherine woke to find snow piled against her door and the temperature well below freezing. She spent the day ensuring her boarders were comfortable, keeping the fires going, serving hot meals and coffee. Walker appeared mid-afternoon, snow-covered and concerned. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said. "We are managing fine," Catherine assured him. "But you should not have ridden all this way in the storm. You think a little snow would keep me from checking on you." Walker's eyes were warm despite the cold. "Catherine, you are the most important person in my life. I will always come." That evening, when the storm had not let up, Catherine insisted Walker stay rather than ride back to his ranch in the dark. She gave him a room upstairs, ignoring the knowing looks from her boarders. Let them gossip. Walker was staying because it was sensible, practical, safe. She told herself that right up until she found herself standing outside his door at midnight, unable to sleep, drawn by a need she could not name. Walker opened the door at her soft knock, still dressed in his shirt and trousers. "Catherine, is something wrong?" "No," she said. "Yes." "I do not know." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I do not want to be alone tonight. I do not want to be sensible or practical. I want to be with you." Understanding dawned in Walker's eyes, followed by concern. "Catherine, are you sure? I do not want you to do anything you will regret." "The only thing I regret is wasting time on fear," Catherine said. "I love you, Walker. I want to be with you completely. I know we are not married, and I know it is improper, but I do not care anymore. I have spent my whole life doing what other people expected. For once, I want to choose for myself." Walker pulled her into the room, closing the door softly behind them. "If we do this, there is no going back," he said seriously. "Not for me. Catherine, I want to marry you, to spend my life with you. If you are not ready for that, if you have any doubts, we should wait." "I am ready," Catherine said, and realized it was true. "I want to marry you, Walker. I want to build a life with you. I am not afraid anymore." "Then start over right here," Walker said softly, echoing the words he had said to her that first day when she had been lost and alone. "Right here with me. Leave the past behind and start fresh." Catherine kissed him, pouring all her love and hope and trust into it. Walker responded with a passion that had been carefully restrained for months, and they came together in the firelight with a tenderness that made Catherine weep with joy. Later, lying in Walker's arms, Catherine felt a peace she had never known. This was where she belonged, where she had always been meant to be. Everything that had come before Thomas, Philadelphia, the carefully constructed life that had never fit, had been leading her to this moment, this man, this love. "Marry me," Walker whispered against her hair. "Tomorrow, next week, whenever you are ready. But marry me, Catherine. Let me love you for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Catherine said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in December in the small church in Red Creek with half the town in attendance. Catherine wore a dress of deep blue silk that she had sewn herself, refusing to be married in mourning. Ruth Harrison stood up with her, and Tom Harrison stood with Walker. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Walker kissed her with such joy that the congregation laughed and applauded. The boarding house became their home. Walker moved in, bringing his books and personal belongings, turning the back rooms that had been Catherine's private quarters into their shared space. They worked together, running the boarding house and the ranch, two businesses that complemented each other well. Pete, Henry, and Jack became permanent fixtures, employees of the Circle W who boarded in town during the busy season. Sarah Wells remained as well, though she had developed a romance of her own with the town's young doctor. Lily took over more of the daily operations of the boarding house, allowing Catherine time to help Walker with the ranch accounts. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt right in a way Catherine's old life never had. She and Walker worked hard from dawn until dusk most days, but it was good work, meaningful work. They were building something together, a life that was entirely their own. In February, Catherine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never been pregnant during her marriage to Thomas, had sometimes wondered if she was unable to have children. But now, with Walker's child growing inside her, she felt a rightness that dispelled her fears. Walker's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, laughing with pure happiness. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Walker said. "Catherine, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a partner, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was easier than Catherine had feared. She continued working, though Walker insisted she take on less strenuous tasks. Ruth Harrison became a frequent visitor, sharing advice and stories from her own experiences with children. The women of Red Creek threw Catherine a party in the church hall, bringing gifts and well wishes. In late September of 1877, just over a year after Catherine had first arrived in Red Creek, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Catherine felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Walker held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James Walker, honoring both Catherine's past and their present. Thomas for her first husband, a man who had deserved better than an arranged marriage, and James for Walker, who had given her the freedom to choose her own happiness. The baby transformed their lives in ways both challenging and wonderful. Catherine had helped Lily, who adored the baby, and Ruth, who visited often, but she insisted on caring for Thomas herself as much as possible. She nursed him, rocked him, sang him songs her mother had once sung to her. Walker was a devoted father, taking the baby on gentle rides around the ranch, talking to him about cattle and horses and the land they would someday share. Watching her husband with their son, Catherine felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. Winter came early that year, and they spent long evenings by the fire, Catherine nursing the baby while Walker read aloud from books of poetry and adventure. Sometimes Sarah and her doctor would join them, or Ruth and Tom would visit, bringing food and laughter. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling softly outside and the baby asleep in Catherine's arms, Walker presented her with a gift. A beautiful leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. "For your drawings," he said, "and for writing if you want. I thought you might like to record our life together, so someday we can look back and remember." Catherine opened the journal, running her fingers over the smooth pages. On the first page, Walker had written in his neat hand, the story of Catherine and Walker, who started over and found everything. "It is perfect," Catherine said, kissing him. "Thank you." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Catherine sat by the fire and began to write. She wrote about Philadelphia and Thomas, about the stagecoach journey west, about the dusty town and the empty boarding house. She wrote about a cowboy with gray blue eyes who had helped her carry her trunks, who had believed in her when she did not believe in herself, who had loved her back to life. She wrote about fear and courage, about loss and discovery, about the difference between existing and truly living. And she wrote about love, the kind that does not come easily or simply, but that is worth every risk, every leap of faith. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents, disappointments and setbacks. But through it all, Catherine and Walker faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with each shared hardship and triumph. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes. He followed Walker around the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, developing a love for the land that matched his father's. Catherine homeschooled him, teaching him to read and write, to appreciate poetry and art alongside the practical skills he learned from Walker. When Thomas was 3, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Ruth, after Catherine's aunt and their dear friend. Maggie, as she came to be called, was a spirited child who refused to be left behind when her brother and father went out riding. She had Catherine's determination and Walker's fearlessness, a combination that kept her parents constantly on their toes. 2 years later, another son arrived, named William after Walker's father, a gesture of forgiveness and reconciliation. Walker had reconnected with his family through letters, and while he had no desire to return to Missouri, he found he could honor his father's memory without feeling obligated to the life that had been planned for him. The boarding house continued to thrive, now managed primarily by Lily, who had married one of the bank clerks and turned out to have a gift for business. Catherine oversaw operations but spent most of her time at the ranch, helping Walker expand the Circle W into one of the most successful spreads in the territory. Sarah Wells married her doctor and moved into a house of their own, but she remained Catherine's closest friend. Ruth and Tom Harrison became like family, their own children growing up alongside Catherine and Walker's. Pete retired from ranch work and took a permanent room at the boarding house, becoming an honorary grandfather to every child in Red Creek. Henry bought his own small homestead and married a girl from Cheyenne. Jack moved on after a few years, following the cattle trails south, but he sent letters occasionally, always addressed to the best boarding house in Wyoming. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Walker took Catherine back to the spot where they had shared their first kiss, outside the boarding house under the stars. The building had been expanded and improved over the years, a success story that the whole town took pride in. "You ever regret it?" Walker asked, holding her hand. "Leaving Philadelphia, your old life, all of it." Catherine looked at her husband, his face weathered by sun and wind but still handsome, his eyes still holding that same warmth that had drawn her from the beginning. She thought of their children, sleeping safely at home with Ruth watching over them. She thought of the life they had built together, the community they were part of, the love that had only grown stronger with time. "Not for a single moment," she said. "Coming here, finding you, building this life, it is the best thing I have ever done. You told me to start over right here, and I did. I started over and I found home." Walker pulled her close, kissing her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "I love you, Catherine Walker. I loved you the moment I saw you standing in the street with your trunks, looking lost and determined and beautiful, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Catherine said. "Thank you for seeing who I could be, even when I could not see it myself. Thank you for being patient, for being kind, for loving me enough to let me find my own strength." They stood together under the Wyoming stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something lasting and true. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Catherine's mother, who had never forgiven her daughter for leaving Philadelphia, passed away without reconciliation, a grief Catherine carried quietly. Walker's father died as well, and they made the journey to Missouri for the funeral, where Walker finally made peace with his past. Red Creek grew from a small cattle town into a proper community, with a school, a church, several businesses, and eventually even a railroad spur. Catherine and Walker's children thrived, each finding their own path. Thomas took over management of the ranch, showing a natural talent for both ranching and business. Maggie surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, following in Sarah's footsteps. William showed artistic talent that reminded everyone of his mother, and Catherine encouraged him to pursue it, sending him to study art in Denver and eventually Chicago. The boarding house eventually passed fully to Lily and her husband, though Catherine maintained an ownership stake. It remained a fixture of Red Creek, a place where newcomers could find a foothold in the West, just as Catherine once had. As Catherine and Walker grew older, they spent more time together, taking rides across the land they had built their life on, watching sunsets from the porch of the ranch house, reading to each other by the fire. Their love had matured from passionate beginnings into something deeper and more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and countless small acts of daily devotion. On a warm spring evening in 1896, 20 years after Catherine had first arrived in Red Creek, she and Walker sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter and given them 2 grandsons. Maggie had recently announced her engagement to a lawyer from Cheyenne. William was home visiting from Chicago, where his paintings were beginning to attract attention. "We did all right, did we not?" Walker said, his hand finding Catherine's as naturally as breathing. "We did more than all right," Catherine said. "We did wonderfully." She thought back to the woman she had been when she stepped off that stagecoach, young and scared and uncertain, grieving a husband she had barely known, facing a future she could not imagine. That woman had been so lost, so desperate for direction, for permission to want something more than the life she had been given. And then a cowboy with kind eyes and calloused hands had helped her with her trunks, had checked on her boarding house, had offered her friendship and then love. He had told her to start over right here in this dusty Wyoming town, and she had. She had started over, and in doing so, she had found herself. "I was thinking," Walker said, breaking into her thoughts, "about taking a trip. The kids are all settled, the ranch is running smoothly. We could go to San Francisco or Denver, maybe even back east if you wanted." Catherine smiled, squeezing his hand. "Where would we go back east? I have no family there anymore, no ties. This is my home now, Walker. This has been my home for 20 years. The only place I want to be is right here with you." "Right here," Walker echoed, smiling. "I like the sound of that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the family they had created, held by the love they had nurtured through 2 decades of life's trials and triumphs. The Wild West that had once seemed so foreign and frightening had become Catherine's refuge, her proving ground, her home. She had buried her husband back east and headed west, seeking nothing more than a place to survive. But she had found so much more: purpose, strength, community, and a love that had transformed her life completely. Walker had told her to start over right here, and she had taken that chance, that leap of faith. And oh, what a beautiful life she had built from that single choice. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, Catherine leaned her head on Walker's shoulder, perfectly content. She had traveled 2,000 miles to find this spot, this man, this life. And she would not change a single mile of that journey, because every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be: home. Finally, completely, joyfully home. The following years brought more changes, as life always does. Thomas expanded the ranch further, buying adjacent land and increasing the herd. He and his wife had 2 more children, daughters this time, who kept their grandparents laughing with their antics. Maggie married her lawyer and moved to Cheyenne, where she opened a school for girls. carrying on her belief that women deserved education and opportunities. William's art career flourished, and though he traveled extensively, he always returned to Red Creek, saying it was the landscape of his heart. Catherine and Walker settled into a comfortable rhythm of semi-retirement, handing over most of the ranch operations to Thomas while still maintaining involvement in decisions. They traveled occasionally, visiting Maggie in Cheyenne, attending William's art exhibitions in Denver, but they were always happy to return to the Circle W. Catherine continued to draw and write, filling journal after journal with stories of their life, sketches of the changing landscape, portraits of their children and grandchildren. Walker encouraged her to display her art, and eventually the general store began selling her sketches to tourists passing through on the railroad. It was a small thing, but it gave Catherine immense satisfaction to know that her work was valued. Their 50th wedding anniversary fell in December of 1927, though they had actually been married in 1877, making it their 50-year celebration. The entire town of Red Creek turned out for the party at the church hall, the same place they had danced on Catherine's first social evening in town all those decades ago. Catherine was 74 now, her dark hair turned silver, her hands marked by years of work. Walker was 76, his face weathered and lined, his body still strong despite the passing years. They moved more slowly now, but they moved together as they always had. At the party, their children and grandchildren gave speeches, telling stories about their parents' enduring love. Friends shared memories of Catherine's early days in Red Creek, of Walker's devotion, of the life they had built together. Ruth Harrison, now in her 90s and frail but still sharp as a tack, stood and raised her glass. "I told Catherine once, more than 50 years ago, that life in the West is too hard and too short to waste on propriety," Ruth said, her voice still strong. "I told her to stop worrying about being perfect and allow herself to be happy." I am proud to say she took my advice, and look at the beautiful life she and Walker created. To Catherine and Walker, may we all be so lucky in love. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by gratitude and joy. Walker pulled her close, kissing her forehead. 50 years, he said softly, and I would do it all again every single day. So would I, Catherine whispered. Every single day. They danced that night, moving slowly to the music, surrounded by everyone they loved. Catherine's head rested on Walker's shoulder, and she closed her eyes, remembering another dance, another time, when they had stood outside in the starlight and admitted their love for the first time. So much had changed since then. They had raised children, built businesses, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. They had buried friends and celebrated births, endured hardships and savored triumphs. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation everything else was built upon. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Catherine and Walker stood at the door of the church hall, thanking everyone for coming. When the last guest had departed, they walked slowly back to the boarding house, which Lily's daughter now ran, though it still bore the name Morrison House in honor of its founder. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Catherine stopped on the street, looking at the building that had started it all. It had been expanded and modernized over the years, but the core structure remained, including those green shutters she had painted so long ago. "I was so scared that first day," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Standing right here with my trunks, having no idea what I was doing or how I would survive. And then a handsome cowboy came along and offered to help," Walker said with a grin. Catherine laughed. "You were covered in dust and I thought you were presumptuous." I was covered in dust, Walker agreed. But I was also smitten. One look at you, all proper and determined and terrified, and I knew my life was about to change. Mine too, Catherine said, though it took me longer to admit it. They stood together in the cold, looking at the life they had built, the community they had helped create, the legacy they would leave behind. And Catherine felt a peace so complete, so perfect, that she wanted to hold on to this moment forever. Walker seemed to sense her thoughts. "Are you happy, Catherine?" he asked. "Truly happy?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," Catherine said. "You gave me everything, Walker. A home, a family, a purpose, and most of all, you gave me the freedom to become who I was always meant to be. You told me to start over right here, and I did. I started over, and I found my whole life waiting. We found it together," Walker corrected gently. "Every step of the way, we did it together." Hand in hand, they walked back to the ranch, to the home they had shared for 50 years, to the life they had built from courage and love and an unwavering belief in each other. And as they settled into bed that night, Catherine wrapped in Walker's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who had loved her through it all, for every moment of this wild, wonderful, perfectly imperfect life. The years that remained were gentle ones. Catherine and Walker spent their days surrounded by family, watching their grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. They took quiet pleasure in simple things: morning coffee on the porch, evening rides when the weather allowed, reading together by the fire. Walker passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1931, at the age of 80. Catherine held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the 54 years they had shared. The grief was profound, a physical ache that never fully left, but it was tempered by joy at having loved and been loved so completely. Catherine lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still drawing, still writing in her journals, still finding beauty in the Wyoming landscape she had come to love. She spoke often of Walker, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter rather than tears. On a warm spring morning in 1936, Catherine Walker passed away at the age of 83, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch of the Circle W, a sketch of Walker in her lap and a smile on her face. Her children found her there, peaceful and content, gone to join the man she had loved for more than half a century. They buried her beside Walker in the Red Creek Cemetery, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire town attended the funeral, paying tribute to a woman who had arrived as a frightened widow and become a cornerstone of their community. Her children spoke of her strength and kindness, her grandchildren of her stories and wisdom, her great-grandchildren of her gentle hands and warm hugs. But it was Thomas, the eldest child, who perhaps said it best. Standing beside his mother's grave, he read from one of her journals, the entry she had written on her 50th wedding anniversary. "I came to Wyoming Territory seeking nothing more than survival, a place to exist after the life I had known ended. But I found so much more than that. I found purpose in running a business, in contributing to a community. I found strength I never knew I possessed. I found friendship and family. And most of all, I found a love so pure and true that it transformed everything. Walker told me to start over right here in this dusty frontier town, and I took that chance. I started over, and in doing so, I found my real life, my true self, my greatest joy. If I could go back and speak to that frightened young woman who stepped off the stagecoach in 1876, I would tell her this: be brave, choose love, and trust that the journey, however uncertain, is worth taking. Because on the other side of fear lies everything you have ever wanted, everything you were meant to be. As Thomas finished reading, there was not a dry eye among the mourners. But there was also joy, a celebration of a life well lived, of love that had endured, of a legacy that would continue through the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren Catherine and Walker had created together. The boarding house still stands in Red Creek, now a historical landmark, with a plaque that reads, Morrison House, established 1876 by Catherine Morrison Walker, who helped build this community and showed that courage and love can transform any life. The Circle W remains in the family, passed down through generations, still thriving, still a testament to what two people can build when they work together toward a common dream. And sometimes, on clear nights when the stars are bright over Wyoming, locals swear they can see two figures walking hand in hand across the prairie. A woman in a simple dress and a cowboy in worn boots, starting over right here, over and over again, for all eternity. Their love story became legend in Red Creek, passed down through generations, a reminder that it is never too late to start over, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that courage and hope can transform even the most frightened heart into something brave and beautiful. Catherine had buried her husband back east and headed west, seeking nothing more than a place to survive. But she had found a cowboy who told her to start over right here, who loved her into becoming her truest self, who gave her everything she had never known she wanted. And in the end, that is the greatest love story of all. Not the fairy tale romance of perfection and ease, but the real and raw and beautiful story of two imperfect people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building a life of purpose and passion and enduring devotion. They started over right here in the wild Wyoming territory, and they found everything that matters. They found home. They found love. They found each other, and they lived, truly and completely lived, happily ever after.